Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I'm an engineer on the S3 team, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about organizations and complexity, and how we structure our teams and organizations to deal with complexity. Now, as Werner said, S3 has been around for 18 years, and I find this remarkable. It's kind of the coolest thing that I've ever worked on in my career. The idea that a single distributed system and a single team has actually run continuously for 18 years. And so I'd like to make a couple of observations about some things that I think are interesting and successful about how the organization works. But I got to start with a disclaimer. Because I would hate for the team to feel like I got up here today and told you that we had figured this out, that we'd solved the problem of organizational complexity. I think that we actually have it. I think we still have a lot to learn, and we're learning every day. The system continues to evolve, the team continues to get bigger, but when we are at our best, I think we get a couple of things right, and I think they're worth sharing. So before I tell you about the two things that I think we get right, I have a question for you. Does anyone know what this is? Has anyone ever seen one of these? There's no wheels at the front. This is a sled from a tractor pull. When I was a kid, I grew up in Ottawa, Canada. We had family that lived about an hour from town, and at the end of the summer every year we would drive out and go to a country fair in Shawville, Quebec. And the fair had, all the stuff that's awesome about country fairs: contests for the largest vegetables, a midway, and of course a tractor pull. And so the tractor pull involved farmers bringing their tractors out. They'd attach it to this sled, and there'd be a track. It was especially awesome if it was rainy, because it'd be muddy. And through a combination of the power of the tractor and the skill of the driver, they'd pull the sled as far as they could down the track. But as the sled pulled, the bucket on top that was full of weight would make the sled heavier and heavier. So this is a weird diagram, but this is basically how I think about software development. There's this incredible commonality between tractor pulling and developing large distributed systems. The commonality is that as you pull, it gets heavier and heavier. On the first day, staring at that empty buffer, it's the most awesome time in terms of the openness and possibility and the lack of burden. But as you pull, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. You accumulate complexity. And you can go a certain distance through sheer power and force of will, but ultimately you have to acknowledge the weight of the sled. And so I think, as a sort of general observation, we need to acknowledge that our organizations are at least as complex as the software we build, and we need to give them the same attention. So the first observation that I'd like to make, that I think the S3 team does a pretty good job of, is that successful teams tend to be at least a little bit scared all of the time that they're getting it wrong. They're always looking for the things that aren't quite right. And when things are going really well, that's when you're kind of the most scared, that you've missed something. And so being a little bit scared and asking questions and trying to improve is a thing that the S3 team, I think, does a good job of. I'll give you one example. About 6 years ago, we were going through this period where we were growing a lot. We were bringing on a lot of new engineers to the team. And S3 cannot miss ever on durability. Durability is so central to the engineering team and the way that we approach things. But we were concerned that we had to maintain this focus and this sort of investment in durability as we brought on a whole bunch of new folks that were great engineers but hadn't worked in this kind of environment before. And so one of the other PEs and I, Seth Markle, sat down and talked a lot about how we were going to do this. And we decided to build a program where we borrowed an idea from security engineering, the idea of a threat model, where you write down your security threats and you assess whether the model matches your defenses. We came up with the idea of a durability threat model and built a structure where when the teams were going to make changes to S3, they wrote down the durability risks that they could anticipate and what they were doing to make up for them, to counter them. And then we could take a smaller number of engineers that had been on the team for a long time, that had tons of operational and engineering experience with durability, and we got them to act as durability reviewers. And we would sit down and have these awesome conversations around the durability threat model where we'd try and poke holes, and we'd find stuff and we would improve, but we would also teach as a consequence of that thing. And so it's one example there's hundreds probably of examples of mechanisms that we've done to sort of scale the team, but the bottom line is that we are encouraging questioning, right? Consciously challenging the status quo. And to borrow a quote from Grace Hopper, right? When we start to see things like people saying, we do this way because we've always done it this way, it's an example of a warning sign that maybe you should be asking more questions and maybe you should be a little bit more scared. So that's one. The second observation that I'd like to call out is this idea of ownership. And I think ownership is something that is absolutely fascinating about S3, but AWS engineering all up, right? The way that Amazon builds. And ownership is really hard to describe. So I'm going to try and do it to you with a quick exercise. I'd like you to think of a time in your career or in your life where you've worked on something that you really, really loved, that you cared about. And in that instance of working on that thing, I'd like you to think about how hard you worked, how invested you were in quality, and how much you really were excited to deliver it. And now I'd like you to flip and think about a time where you were working on something because you were told to do it. You were working on something that you didn't necessarily feel that you understood the benefit of or the outcome for, but you had to do it because you were told to. And I'd like you to think about how much you worked on that one and how eager you were to land it and how the quality of that one worked out. The difference between these two things, to me, is kind of the property of ownership. A team that owns what they're working on is in the first category. And when I look at the most effective leaders that I work with, they're incredible at driving ownership. And I see them do two things. The first one is they build a sense of agency within the teams that they work with. Agency means letting the teams feel that they've got the breadth and the support to really deliver. And so the first step in building agency is to not tell the team what or how to do, right? It's to bring a problem to the team, to explain the importance, to get the team involved, and to ultimately trust them and to give them ownership of what they're building. And in giving it, we're actually letting them own the idea and letting them celebrate the win because it's theirs. So that's the first thing that I've seen leaders do that's super, super effective. When you have a team that has agency, the second thing that really effective leaders that I've worked with, especially in S3, do, is they drive urgency. Because even the best teams will find ways to slow down. They'll find surprises, they'll find things that they're worried about shipping, and you're always, always having to make decisions and compromises as you ship. And so moving fast as a leader means establishing ownership, stepping back, letting the team run, but keeping your foot on the gas and making sure that you're checking in and helping problem solve and helping the team feel that there is a need to deliver, but they're supported to deliver. And so really, ownership is this combination of agency and urgency. And that's it. The two things that I discussed were that you should be a little bit scared and that you should push ownership all the way down to the level of 2 pizza teams and let those teams really own what they deliver, focus on letting them love their work, but drive them to deliver with support. Thank you very much.